Hey guys, Edre here. Today I'm going to be doing a brand new album review. I'm going to be reviewing the new Kid Cudi album, Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen. This is an album that I was actually anticipating quite a bit, and I went back and actually even revisited his I can't remember if it was his debut, but the first Man on the Moon album, End of the Day. And a bit of background, because this is how I start all my reviews, that I think that is an extremely solid album. One of the best of this style, and a really innovative and influential album without a doubt. It came out in 2009, and to this day, we are still hearing many artists citing Cudi and that album in general as major influences. Oftentimes right next to 808s and Heartbreaks by Kanye West. Though that style and that era and that what Kid Cudi was doing at the time was very innovative and very stand out, and his influence is still heard today in artists like Travis Scott. I mean, even the name Travis Scott is influenced by Kid Cudi. So going into this album, it's I always kind of go into it a bit cautious whenever there's an artist that's already a bit influential, because I always wonder, will they be able to make an album that is as impactful as their very influential one? And so I did go into this a little bit nervous, but I also went into it very optimistic, because up to this point, a lot of what I've heard Cudi doing has been relatively good. I mean, albums like Speeding Bullet to Heaven are kind of notoriously not that good, and I understand that it wasn't that good, but I still appreciate the risks that was taken on that album. And a lot of Cudi's features that I've heard, such as the song The Scots with Travis Scott earlier this year, or his work with Kanye West on The Kids See Ghosts, or my personal favorite Kanye song, Ghost Town. For the most part, I've been relatively satisfied with much of Kid Cudi's work lately, at least on his features. So going into this, I was very optimistic. And for the most part, I like talking about the style of the album first. And the first thing that really stuck out to be on Man on the Moon 3 is it kind of still follows through with that more cloud rap, very psychedelic hip-hop sound that Cudi has experimented quite a lot with. However, don't take that as a negative. Cudi really has done a great job experimenting and expanding this style of music, and he continues to do that on this album, even though this is the third installment in the Man on the Moon series. Musically, the psychedelic and dreamy production is just it fits the album perfectly, because a lot of the songs on here are beautifully composed, and I think have some of Cudi's most interesting instrumentals yet. And to me, it really seems like a natural progression from his Man on the Moon 1, because I feel like stylistically there's a lot more similarities between 3 and 1 than the second one. That's just my personal. Man on the Moon 2, I feel like, is a bit more out of place compared to Man on the Moon 3. That's just my personal observations, but that's not to take anything away from the second one. But I do think Man on the Moon 3 is a more natural progression from Man on the Moon 1, and I think that overall, it's a relatively solid project that seems like a very good natural progression, and that all songs like Another Day honestly are also reminiscent of the song Welcome to Heartbreak in a way on 808s and Heartbreaks by Kanye. That song obviously features Kid Cudi, which is why I brought it up. That's one of my favorite songs on that album, and I kind of like hearing him take a more modern approach to that sound. He really does play into a lot of what I've already come to know and love from Kid Cudi, but does it in a way that still feels fresh and new. The dark beat, the much more dark and gloomy beat on the song with Pop Smoke, Show Out, I think is actually one of the most intriguing instrumentals on this entire project. I think it's one of the best on this. I think overall the song itself is one of the best songs on the album. I think Pop Smoke's very dark and grisly vocals on here are a perfect match, and once again reiterates how big of a loss Pop Smoke is to the hip-hop world and to the music world in general. Pop Smoke was utilized perfectly here, and it didn't just feel like he was using it as a cash grab. It felt like an actual genuine feature, which is something I appreciate a lot. The very atmospheric synthesizers and overall luscious synth pads throughout the album, and for the most part on the songs Mr. Solo Dolo 3, as well as The Pale Moonlight, I think are some of the best composed tracks on the album, with some of the most beautiful sounding synthesizers and pads being used. Definitely some of the best tracks on the album, in my opinion, with a very nice, dreamy sound, and a really good way to encompass the entire album. If I had to narrow down the overall sound of this album to one or two songs, this would be it. The beautiful production on here with the beautiful arrangements and the nice synths overall are really well executed, and I think some of the best on the album. However, I do have some tracks here and there that I do think fall not the best, they fall a little short for me, such as Elsies' Baby Boy. It falls a little short. Not a horrible song, not a bad song by any means, but really just, I feel like the thing that really kind of turns it off for me is there's a bit of a guitar riff in it that just seems a little off-putting and out of place. And the drum beat throughout it is a bit sporadic, and well, I usually like it when Cudi experiments, and he definitely does experiment on this track. I just don't really feel like it landed as well and didn't leave as profound of an impact. Luckily, however, the following track, September 16th, is very stylistically similar to Elsies' Baby Boy, but is much more impactful and much more well-composed, and that is something that I find time and time again on this album. If there's ever a moment where I feel like a song might fall a little short or is not the best, usually it's not long before Kid Cudi follows through with another track that's much better composed and very, very well put together, and it just distracts me from any of the flaws. So he makes up for a lot of these flaws with songs that are very well composed throughout the album. Vocally, Kid Cudi really does make his case here as a very versatile vocalist and rapper here. I've always been intrigued by his vocals anyway. That's always been one of the main highlights of his music up to this point. His more humming style of vocals has been praised across the board, and I've always liked it. But I feel like he even pushes his boundaries even more on Man on the Moon 3, to a point where I feel like he shows a very versatile side to his vocals that a lot of times you don't get with him. And I think he's a really strong vocalist with a very unique voice, and I think he utilizes it perfectly on this album and knows when to hold back, but also knows when to get let loose. And I think one of the songs that really perfectly demonstrates his beautiful vocals is Damaged. Very heart-wrenching track, but I think one of his best songs vocally. And I also really want to talk a little bit about this track, Lovin' Me, featuring Phoebe Bridgers. One of my favorite artists this year. Phoebe Bridgers' album Punisher is one of the best albums to come out this year, and overall Phoebe is just one of the most promising artists out there with one of the most beautiful voices and best songwriting capabilities. So hearing these two collaborate on a song was a dream for me, and I think that Kid Cudi really proves that his voice can go hand in hand with Phoebe's voice. He knows how to use his voice in the right way with her, in the song Lovin' Me has excellent chemistry between Kid Cudi and Phoebe Bridgers. It's one of my favorites on the album, and overall, that song was, I think, one of the best on here. I mean, the two of them, stylistically, are very different from each other, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of their more soft singing styles, and they came together perfectly on the track Lovin' Me. Definitely check out that track. Before I just kind of do an overall thing, I just want to briefly talk about a little bit more about the production. I think that it's very beautifully produced. I think overall, it's one of the best productions I've heard on a hip-hop album this year. And it's very reminiscent of some of his earlier material, such as Man on the Moon 1, and that kind of era of music, but it's a refreshing take on it. It still feels modern and fresh. It doesn't feel outdated or like he's rehashing any old ideas. No, it feels like he is expanding his old ideas to an even bigger and greater grounds. And it still remains relevant, and I just think it's a very nice, refreshing sounding production. Overall, I mean, I have very little negative to say here, other than the fact that I think not every single song lands the best. I think some songs, they're all right. They aren't like the greatest things I've ever heard from Cudi, so that does drag it down a little. But for the most part, it's a very solid album that I will be returning to time and time again. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen, I think a decent 8 out of 10. And anybody that doesn't know my reviews needs to know anything above a 5 is good, anything below a 5 is negative. So a decent 8 is a really positive review. So I am really glad Cudi was able to come back with a relatively strong third installment in the Man on the Moon series. And it, for the most part, satisfied me, and I liked a lot of the risks that were taken. I think vocally he continues to prove to be one of the best vocalists in hip-hop out there. And production-wise, the dreamy production, he still sounds just as relevant as ever. With all that being said, Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen, I feel pretty confident giving it a decent 8 out of 10. Good job, Kid Cudi. That is it for now, and goodbye.